Bianca's hand came down hard across Zuriya's face. Not a push, not a shove, a deliberate open palm strike that snapped Zuriya's headset voice and sent her crashing into the edge of the dining table. 7 months pregnant. Belly first toward the marble. She caught herself on both hands, knuckles white against the cold floor, and the sound that came out of her wasn't a scream. It was something smaller, more broken. The kind of sound a person makes when they've already used up all their fight, and there's nothing left but survival. Please. Zuriya pressed one hand against her stomach. The other trembled against the floor. Please, just leave me alone. I'm already in pain. Bianca stood over her, heels. Silk blouse. Not a hair out of place. You don't get to beg me, Bianca said. Not in his house. If you were in Zuriya's position right now, 7 months pregnant, alone, no one coming, what would you do? Before we go any further, if stories like this move you, if they make you feel something real, please subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Leave a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button, and let's get into it. The rain had been falling over Chicago since mid-afternoon, the kind of heavy, relentless rain that turns the city into a blur of smeared lights and black pavement. Inside the Ryu estate on the lakefront, the windows were thick enough that you couldn't hear the storm unless you stood right beside the glass and pressed your palm flat against it. Zuriya had done that once in her first week there, just to feel something familiar. Rain felt like home. The silence of that mansion did not. She had arrived 3 months ago with 2 suitcases and a secret she hadn't told anyone. She wasn't afraid of Kieran Ryu. She was afraid of what was following her. The first time she'd noticed the car, she'd been leaving her prenatal appointment on Michigan Avenue. A dark sedan, no plates visible, idling half a block back. She'd told herself it was nothing. A delivery driver. Someone waiting for their spouse. She'd taken a cab home, back to the cramped studio apartment she could no longer afford, and when she'd looked out the window, 20 minutes later, the sedan was parked across the street. She hadn't slept that night. 3 days after Malcolm's funeral, Kieran Ryu appeared at her door. She almost didn't answer. She'd heard his name before, once, from Malcolm, spoken low and careful the way Malcolm spoke when he was choosing his words. Kieran's not what people think he is. He's not what I thought he was, either at first. Malcolm had said nothing else, and Zuriya, tired from a double shift and 6 months pregnant, hadn't asked. She should have asked. When she opened the door and saw Kieran standing there, tall, dark suit, tattoos climbing above his collar, expression that gave away absolutely nothing, her first instinct was to shut it again. Mrs. Cole. His voice was quieter than she expected. My name is, I know who you are. He nodded once, like that was the right answer. Then you know I don't make social calls. She'd let him in because she was exhausted and owed 2 months of rent, and there was a car outside she didn't recognize, and her husband was dead, and she had no one. Not a single person she could call. Her mother was gone. Malcolm's family had scattered after the funeral, like they'd been waiting for permission to disappear. She had a neighbor named Donna who brought casseroles and a social worker who called once a week, and that was it. Kieran sat at her kitchen table, looked around the apartment. Really? Looked not in the way people look when they're being polite, but in the way people look when they're cataloging damage. And then he folded his hands on the table and said, "Succeeding, Malcolm asked me to make sure you were taken care of. Malcolm's dead." Yes. A pause, which is why I'm here. She'd wanted to throw him out. She'd wanted to tell him that whatever Malcolm had gotten mixed up in, she wasn't part of it. She didn't want anything from people like Kieran Ryu. She was fine. She was going to be fine. Instead, she sat down because her ankles were swollen and her back hurt, and she hadn't eaten a real meal since the funeral. And she said, "What exactly does taking care of mean to someone like you?" He hadn't flinched at that. She'd almost respected him for it. There's an apartment on the estate grounds, separate from the main house, private entrance, full security. A job managing the domestic staff, which mostly means you'd be overseeing people who already know what they're doing. Access to my personal physician for all prenatal appointments. And he stopped. Protection. From what? He looked at her steadily. That's what I'm trying to determine. She hadn't moved to the estate that day. She'd made him wait 4 days, during which the sedan appeared 3 more times, and someone tried her front door at 2 in the morning. She heard the handle, the slow, testing turn of it, and she sat in her kitchen with a steak knife on the table in front of her until dawn came up gray and nothing happened. On the 4th day, she called the number he'd left and said she needed 48 hours to pack. "Take 72, he said. "I'll send a car." That was 3 months ago. She had built a small life inside the walls of the Ryu estate. She was good at making things work in tight spaces, always had been. She learned the rhythms of the house, which guards changed shift at what hours, which hallways the security cameras covered, which rooms Kieran used, and which ones stood empty for days. She managed the staff with the same quiet steadiness she'd brought to every job she'd ever had, which is to say, she never raised her voice, never asked anyone to do something she wouldn't do herself, and never let anyone see when something hurt. The staff liked her, mostly. Mrs. Hana, the head housekeeper, had looked at Zuriya on her first day with the flat skepticism of a woman who had seen many people come through those doors under unusual circumstances and had learned to reserve judgment. Within 2 weeks, she was leaving covered plates of food outside Zuriya's apartment door without being asked, and telling people who gave Zuriya trouble that they could take it up with her directly. The trouble had a name: Bianca Serrano. Zuriya had been careful around Bianca from the start. She read the situation the moment she saw them together. Kieran controlled, distant, polite. Bianca performing a warmth she clearly did not feel, watching Kieran's face for reactions he didn't give. A woman who was used to being the most important person in any room and had recently begun suspecting she wasn't. That suspicion was a live wire, and Zuriya had no intention of touching it. So she stayed out of Bianca's way. She took different routes through the house. She disappeared from rooms when Bianca entered them. She said good morning when spoken to, and nothing else. It didn't matter. The first thing Bianca said to her directly, 6 days after Zuriya arrived, was delivered with a bright social smile in front of 2 of the kitchen staff. "Zuriya, that dress doesn't really do you any favors, does it? I mean, at your size, especially with the pregnancy, you really should ask Mrs. Hannah about the staff uniform options. Something structured." The kitchen staff went very still. Zuriya looked at Bianca for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you," picked up the tray she'd come for and left. Mrs. Hana appeared in the doorway of Zuriya's apartment that evening, with a cup of tea and the expression of a woman who had many things to say and was choosing to say almost none of them. She set the tea on the table and said, "That one has always needed an audience." "I know the type," Zuriya said. "Don't let her see she's reaching you." "She's not." Mrs. Hana looked at her, with something that might have been pity and might have been respect. She said, which meant she was reserving final judgment, and left. The comments continued. Bianca had a gift for delivering cruelty in the register of concern. "You really shouldn't be carrying that in your condition." Delivered when Zuriya was carrying a light stack of folders. "I've heard that gaining too much weight during pregnancy can cause all kinds of complications." Said at the dinner table in front of Kieran, who hadn't responded, though something in his jaw had shifted. "You walk so slowly now. Is that normal? Maybe you should be resting instead of working." After which she assigned Zuriya a 3-hour task that required standing. Zuriya did not complain to Kieran. This was important. This was a line she had drawn for herself in the first week. She was not going to go to him with Bianca's behavior like a child going to a parent, not because she wasn't angry, not because it didn't cost her something every single day to absorb it, but because she understood exactly how precarious her position was. She was here on Kieran's goodwill. Kieran's goodwill existed because of Malcolm. And Bianca was Kieran's fiancée. The math was not complicated. She also understood, in the way you understand things, when you've survived enough difficult rooms, that Bianca wasn't finished. The escalations had been too steady, too purposeful. There was somewhere this was going. Zuriya didn't know where, but she felt it the way you feel a storm before the barometric pressure drops, something changing in the air, a tension in the architecture of the days. Kieran had been gone for 4 days when things started moving faster. He'd left without much explanation. There was some problem that required his presence, something in the business, his assistant had said in a tone that discouraged questions. The estate felt different without him. Not safer. The opposite. Kieran's presence was like a weight that held everything in place, and without it, things began to shift. Bianca began appearing in parts of the house she didn't usually occupy. Zuriya would round a corner and find her standing in a hallway, apparently doing nothing, watching. She came into rooms where Zuriya was working and didn't leave. She had a new quality to her, something less like cruelty and more like calculation, like she was looking for something and had decided Zuriya was the place to start looking. On the second day of Kieran's absence, Zuriya was reorganizing the library on the second floor when she looked up and found Bianca in the doorway with a glass of wine and an expression Zuriya didn't immediately categorize. Mrs. Cole. Zuriya set down the book she was holding. Miss Serrano, you've been here for what, 3 months now? About that. And in that time, has Kieran explained to you why exactly you're here? Zuriya held very still. He offered me a position and a place to stay after my husband's death. That's all. That's all. Bianca took a slow sip of wine. He's never done that before. Not for any of the staff. Not for anyone. She walked into the room, running one finger along the spines of the books. Kieran doesn't do things out of generosity. Everything he does has a reason. I wouldn't know anything about how he operates his business. No, of course not. Bianca stopped at a particular shelf, pulled a book out an inch, pushed it back. You know what I think is interesting? The guards assigned to escort you when you leave the property. There are 3 of them. 3 for a domestic staff manager. I went to a charity gala last week with 2. She turned to look at Zuriya directly. What would you need 3 guards for, Mrs. Cole? Zuriya's hands were clasped in front of her belly. She kept her expression easy. I imagine Mr. Ryu just wanted to make sure the property staff were safe while he was away. Bianca smiled, and it didn't reach anything above her mouth. You're very composed. Thank you, that wasn't a compliment. She left without finishing her wine. That night, Zuriya lay in her apartment with one hand on her belly, feeling the baby move a slow roll, an elbow or a knee pressing outward, and thought about Malcolm. She thought about him the way she always did lately, in pieces. The way he took his coffee, the sound of his laugh when something actually surprised him, which was rare. The way he'd looked at her across a crowded room at a friend's birthday party 7 years ago, like she was the only thing in it that made any sense. She thought about the pendant that he'd given her 4 months before he died. It was a cheap thing, silver plate, the kind you'd find at a street market, a small oval with an abstract pattern engraved on it. He'd pressed it into her hand one morning before she left for work and said, "Don't take this off." I mean it, Z. Don't take it off for anything. She'd thought he was being sentimental. Hormonal. Projecting. She'd put it on and forgotten about it, the way you forget things you wear every day. She touched it now, cold against her collarbone, and didn't know why it made her feel like crying. She told herself it was the pregnancy. She fell asleep with one hand on her belly and the other around the pendant. And in the morning, Bianca was standing outside her door at 7 a.m., before Zuriya had eaten or properly woken, with a list of tasks that would take until midnight. Zuriya took the list. "Good morning, Miss Serrano." Bianca looked at her, a long searching look, and said, "What exactly did Malcolm Cole do for a living?" It was the first time anyone in that house had asked her directly about Malcolm's work. Zuriya felt something go carefully neutral in her chest, the specific internal stillness of a person who has learned how to not react. He worked in finance, she said. Investment consulting. Bianca's eyes didn't move. For whom? Several private clients. This was true. It was also incomplete. Is there something specific you needed, Miss Serrano? I have a full day. Bianca stepped back from the doorway. Don't be late to the dinner service tonight. Kieran's colleagues are visiting. She walked away down the hall, and Zuriya stood in her doorway watching her go, and understanding, clearly for the first time, that something had shifted into a new gear. Bianca wasn't just jealous anymore. She was looking for something specific, and Zuriya didn't know what it was. The dinner that evening was difficult in the specific way that evenings at the Ryu estate were difficult when Bianca decided to make them so, not dramatically, not with scenes, but with a steady, professional application of small humiliations. Zuriya stood near the service corridor, overseeing the staff, while Bianca made sure she was on her feet for the entirety of a 3-hour dinner. When Zuriya briefly leaned against the wall, Bianca appeared and said softly enough that only Zuriya could hear, "Please try to maintain a professional posture. The guests can see you." Zuriya straightened. Her lower back had been aching since morning. The baby had been pressing down with a weight that was new and not comfortable. She had approximately 4 hours of sleep and a list of tasks she hadn't finished. She stood straight, kept her face neutral, and counted the minutes. After the guests had gone, after the staff had cleared the dining room, Zuriya was stacking the last of the linen when Bianca returned. She wasn't carrying anything. She wasn't pretending to have a task. She came into the dining room and closed the door behind her and looked at Zuriya with an expression that had stopped performing anything. "I went into his study tonight," Bianca said. Zuriya kept folding the linen. "Miss Serrana, there are photographs of your husband." Bianca stepped closer. In a locked drawer. Photographs of Malcolm Cole, with Kieran going back 15 years or more. "And a photograph of you." Her voice went tighter, with Kieran's handwriting on it. Zuriya's hands slowed on the linen, then stopped. What did it say? Bianca reached into the folded papers she was holding and threw a photograph onto the table. It slid across the polished surface and stopped in front of Zuriya. It was a surveillance photograph, grainy, taken from a distance. It showed Zuriya leaving her old apartment building, 6 months pregnant, back when she'd still been living there. She'd never seen it before. Beneath the image, in handwriting she didn't recognize, "Protect her at any cost." The room was very quiet. Zuriya looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she looked up at Bianca. "I don't know anything about this." "You're lying." Bianca's voice cracked on the word. Not with anger exactly, with something that had been building for a long time and had finally found its edge. "I've watched you for 3 months. I've watched him be careful around you, in ways he's never careful around anyone. I've watched him ask the staff about your appointments. I've watched those guards follow you, like you're something that needs to be kept safe." She pressed her hands flat against the table. "Who are you to him? Tell me the truth. I am my husband's widow," Zuriya said. She said it quietly, without heat. "That's the only thing I am." "Then, why does he have a photograph of you with those words written on it?" "I don't know." "Why did 3 men with guns escort you to a grocery store last Tuesday?" "I don't know that either." Bianca's composure split like a seam giving way. "Don't you dare stand there and tell me you don't know. Don't you dare. You come into this house, into my house, with your pregnancy and your grief and your big sad eyes, and you make him feel responsible for you." She stopped. Breathed. When she spoke again, the words were careful and terrible. "Did you sleep with him before Malcolm died? Is that baby his?" The room seemed to go very still. Zuriya set down the linen. She looked at Bianca, really looked, the way she hadn't let herself look before, because looking directly at something dangerous usually invited it closer, and she felt, beneath the exhaustion and the backache and the fear that had become so familiar it lived in her, like a second heartbeat, a clean, clear anger. "I loved my husband," she said. "I love him right now, tonight. I will love him for the rest of my life. And this baby is his son. And if you ever say otherwise again, you're in no position to threaten me." "I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you the truth," which apparently you wouldn't recognize if it sat down across from you.
Zuriya took a breath.
Her back was screaming. Her hands were shaking, just slightly. "I didn't come to this house looking for anything except a safe place to have my baby. I didn't come here looking for Kieran, or for you, or for any of this. I came here because I had nowhere else to go, and someone died and left me alone, and I was scared." The anger was still there, clean and cold, but underneath it, something rawer was trying to surface. She pushed it down. "I have never done anything to you. I have stayed out of your way from the first day I arrived. I have said nothing. I have asked for nothing. And every single day, you have found a new way to this because you're here." Bianca's voice broke open. Don't you understand? You're here, in his house, under his protection, and he watches you like. I lost my husband. The words came out harder than Zuriya intended. I lost the father of my child. I didn't come here looking for yours. Bianca grabbed her wrist. It wasn't a tight grip. Not at first, it was the grip of someone who had stopped thinking clearly, who was running on something past strategy. But Zuriya tried to pull back, instinctively, and Bianca's fingers tightened. Let go. Zuriya's voice went flat. Please, the baby. Tell me the truth. Let go of me. Zuriya tried again to pull away. Her balance was bad. It had been bad for weeks. The pregnancy shifted the center of gravity, making every movement require more calculation than she was used to. Bianca shoved her. It wasn't a massive push. It didn't need to be. Zuriya's center of gravity was wrong. Her footing was uncertain on the polished marble, and the dining table caught the side of her hip as she went backward, and then she was on the floor, both hands down. The cold marble against her palms, a contraction sharp, sudden, nothing like the Braxton Hicks she'd been having tearing through her entire abdomen. She cried out. It was not a sound she chose to make. It came out of her, involuntarily, the way sound escapes when the body overrides the mind. And when it faded, she was kneeling on the floor with one hand pressed hard against her stomach and the other to spear against the marble, and she was trying to breathe, and the pain was not stopping the way it was supposed to stop. Bianca stood over her. Please, Zuriya said. The word was barely a voice at all. She didn't say it for Bianca's sake. She said it because it was the only thing she had left. Please leave me alone. I'm already in pain. Bianca looked down at her. Something crossed Bianca's face in that moment, something that might have been horror, might have been the first clear view she'd had of what she was actually doing, but then her jaw tightened, and she reached for Zuriya's arm again and said, "Move." The mansion doors opened. Not slowly, not with warning. They opened with the weight of someone who knew exactly where every hinge and threshold was, and moved through them like they'd been built for him specifically. Rain came in with the cold air. Then the doors filled with a man in a black suit, soaked through at the shoulders, hair flat against his forehead, water still running off the fabric. Kieran Ryu stood beneath his own chandelier. He looked at the room. He looked at Bianca. He looked at Zuriya on the floor. His tattooed hands hung completely motionless at his sides. His face was the most terrifying kind of calm, not blankness, not absence, but the specific stillness of a person who has processed what they're seeing and is now deciding. He said nothing for 3 seconds that stretched out until they had no end. Then, in a voice so even it was almost worse than shouting, "Take your hands off her." Bianca released Zuriya's arm immediately, without deciding to. And Zuriya, still on the floor with her hand pressed against her belly, and the contraction fading to a dull roar, and the cold marble against her knees, looked up at Kieran, standing in the doorway of his own house, with rain drying, and something in his substance, something in expression that she didn't have a word for yet, not anger, not protectiveness, not grief, though it was all of those things in thought. Malcolm knew. He knew exactly who to call. Behind Kieran, 2 armed guards stepped out of the dark. The rain continued to fall against the black glass windows, and Bianca Serrano stood with her hand at her side, and finally understood, for the first time since she'd woken up that morning with her plans fully formed, that she had badly miscalculated what kind of night this was going to be. Kieran didn't move toward Bianca first. He moved toward Zuriya. That was the thing Bianca would remember later, in the cold hours when everything had already collapsed, not what he said, not the look on his face, but the order of it. The man who controlled rooms full of armed professionals, who had walked into burning buildings and walked back out, crossed his own dining room floor and dropped to one knee beside a pregnant woman on the marble, like that was the only thing in the room that mattered. His hand went to her arm, not her shoulder, not her face, her arm, where Bianca's fingers had been. "Can you stand?" Zuriya's jaw was tight. She was breathing through something, some wave of pain that hadn't finished passing, and she didn't answer immediately, which told Kieran more than words would have. "Don't rush it," he said. "I can stand." She got her feet under her, one hand on the floor, the other pressed against her belly. Kieran put one hand under her elbow and helped her up slowly, carefully, without doing the thing people sometimes did of taking over entirely, like she'd lost the ability to manage her own body. She got upright. She stood still for a moment, testing it. The contraction had faded. The pain was still there, lower, a dull, insistent pressure, but the sharp edge of it had passed. "I'm okay," she said, to herself as much as to him. Kieran stood. He looked at her face for another second, checking, something, calibrating, and then he turned around. Bianca had not moved. She was standing 3 feet from where she'd been when he walked in, her arms still slightly extended from where she'd reached for Zuriya, her composure half reconstructed. The way a person looks when they've been interrupted in the middle of becoming someone they can't explain. Kieran. Her voice came out steadier than it had any right to be. "This isn't..." "Don't," he said it flat. "Just final." Bianca closed her mouth. One of the guards had come through the doorway and positioned himself near the dining room entrance without being told. The other had stayed in the hall. Kieran hadn't looked at either of them, but they were there, and Bianca was aware of them in the way you become aware of walls when a room gets smaller. Kieran picked up the photograph from the dining table. He looked at it for a moment. His face gave nothing away, but something moved through his hands, a tightening in the fingers. Brief, gone. "Where did you get this?" "Your study." Bianca said it without apology. "The locked drawer? Left side. That drawer has a biometric lock. Your old assistant gave me the override code 8 months ago. I never used it until tonight." She lifted her chin slightly. "I had reasons, you had suspicions. I had questions you wouldn't answer." Kieran set the photograph down on the table. He put it face down, slowly, and then stood with both hands flat on the surface and looked at nothing for a moment in the way that meant he was working through something he hadn't decided to share yet. Zuriya was still standing near the far end of the table. She had not tried to leave. She wasn't sure whether that was the right instinct or the wrong one, but something told her that leaving this room right now would be worse than staying in it. "You went through my files," Kieran said. "Yes, you found photographs of Malcolm Cole." "Yes, a beat, and of her. And you decided what exactly? That you had the complete picture?" "I decided I deserved answers." "You deserve..." He stopped himself. A breath in, controlled. Out. When he looked up at Bianca again, the anger was still there, but it was behind something, behind the decision not to use it yet. "What did you decide I owed you answers about? Specifically? Say it out loud." Bianca's gaze went to Zuriya, then back to Kieran. "I want to know what she is to you. She works here. 3 guards when she leaves the property. Kieran. 3. You send me to charity events with 1, sometimes 2. You ask Mrs. Hanna twice a week how she's feeling. You moved her onto the estate within days of her husband's death. Her voice was still controlled, but the seams of it were showing. So don't tell me she just works here." Kieran looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "She doesn't just work here." The room went quiet enough that the rain against the windows was audible for the first time. Bianca went very still. Zuriya, across the table, felt something pull tight in her chest and didn't know what it was. "Malcolm Cole was the closest thing I've ever had to a brother." Kieran said it like he was reading off something he'd written down, not cold, exactly, but contained. The way you contain something that would take up too much room if you let it open fully. "We met when we were 20 years old. Both of us had nothing. Both of us were running from things that were going to catch us eventually." He picked up the photograph again and looked at it. "He pulled me out of a burning building once. Literally. I was unconscious. He went back in. Bianca hadn't moved. He never wanted money for it. He never wanted status. He never asked me for a single thing for 15 years. Kieran set the photograph down again. Until about a year before he died. He came to me and he said, 'If anything happens to me, I need you to make sure Zuriya and the baby are safe.' He wouldn't tell me why. He said he was working on something, and he needed to be sure they were protected regardless of the outcome." He looked at Bianca directly. "That's the whole story. She is Malcolm's widow. The baby is Malcolm's child. And I made a promise to a man who died, keeping a secret I still don't fully understand." The silence stretched. Bianca looked at Zuriya. Zuriya looked back. and Bianca Serrano, who had constructed an entire architecture of jealousy and certainty over 3 months of watching and cataloging and working herself into a story that made sense, stood in the dining room of a man she'd planned to marry and understood, finally, what she had done. Her face changed, not dramatically, just a small collapse around the eyes, the specific look of a person whose certainty has just been removed from underneath them. Then she said, "I pushed her." "I know," Kieran said. "She was on the floor when you came in." "I know that too." Kieran, not right now. His voice wasn't raised. It was exactly the opposite of raised. "Right now, the only thing I care about is making sure she and the baby are all right. We will deal with everything else after." He looked at Zuriya. "Are you in pain?" "Less than before." "Honest." The contraction passed. "There's still some pressure, but it's manageable. I want doctor." "On here?" "It's 11 at night. I'm aware of what time it is." He pulled out his phone and was dialing before he'd finished the sentence, stepping away from the table, speaking quietly into the phone in a way that suggested the person on the other end had fielded calls at 11 at night before and would not be surprised. Zuriya sat down in one of the dining chairs because her back had been asking her to for the past hour and she was done refusing it. The marble floor had been cold and hard, and her knees still ached from it. She folded her hands on the table and looked at the photograph, still face down. Bianca was still standing in the same spot. She started. Zuriya looked at her. Bianca stopped. There was something in Zuriya's face in that moment that wasn't anger, and wasn't forgiveness, and wasn't the blankness of shock. It was the expression of a woman who was very tired and was choosing, deliberately, not to spend what little energy she had left on this particular conversation tonight. It was a stillness that communicated more clearly than any words would have, that there was nothing Bianca could say in the next 6 seconds that Zuriya had the capacity to receive. Bianca looked away first. Kieran came back from the doorway. "Dr. On will be here in 20 minutes. He looked at Mrs. Hana, who had appeared in the doorway at some point during the conversation. Zuriya hadn't noticed when, and since said, "Stay with her." Mrs. Hana was already moving toward Zuriya. Kieran looked at Bianca and said, "Come with me," in a voice that contained a door closing. They left the dining room together, Bianca following slightly behind, and the sound of their footsteps faded down the hallway, and Zuriya sat at the long dining table with Mrs. Hana pulling a chair up beside her, and the photograph face down 2 feet away, and the rain against the windows, and the enormous quiet that falls over a room after something irreversible has happened in it. "Breathe," Mrs. Hana said. "I am breathing. Breathe slower." Zuriya breathed slower. Her hand found the pendant at her collarbone. "Small, cool light. Don't take it off. I mean it, Z. Don't take it off for anything." She pressed it between her thumb and forefinger and thought, "Malcolm, what did you know?" Down the hall, behind a closed door, Kieran and Bianca were having the conversation that had been coming for a long time. Zuriya couldn't hear the words. She could hear the shape of them, the low, controlled register of Kieran's voice, the higher, more fractured rhythm of Bianca's. No shouting, no slamming. That almost made it worse, the lack of spectacle, because it meant the thing happening in that room was real and quiet and would not be easily undone. Dr. An arrived in 18 minutes. She was a compact Korean woman in her 50s, with short gray-streaked hair and the particular manner of someone who had been treating difficult patients in unconventional circumstances for long enough that nothing surprised her anymore. She took Zuriya's blood pressure, listened to the baby's heartbeat, asked a series of direct questions about the contraction's duration and intensity, and examined her with the thoroughness of someone who was not going to accept a patient saying, "I'm fine," as a diagnostic conclusion. "Baby's heartbeat is strong," she said finally. "Your pressure is elevated, which I'd expect after physical stress. The contraction you described sounds like it was triggered by the fall rather than the beginning of labor." She looked at Zuriya steadily. "But you're at 30 weeks. Any further physical trauma needs to be treated as a potential obstetric emergency. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand." "Is this going to happen again?" Zuriya thought about Bianca down the hall, and Kieran's voice, low and final, and the face Bianca had made when she understood what she'd done. "No," she said. "I don't think it is." Dr. An looked at her for a moment, like she was deciding whether to pursue that further. Then she packed her bag and said, "Full bed rest tomorrow. I'll be back the day after. If you feel any contractions, any at all, you call me immediately." "Not tomorrow, immediately." "Yes." After she left, Mrs. Hana brought tea and sat with Zuriya in the small sitting room off the main hall while the house settled around them. The guards changed shift at midnight with the usual muted efficiency. The rain began to ease. Somewhere in the east wing, a door opened and closed, and then there were footsteps going up the stairs. And then the house was quiet again. "She's going to her room," Mrs. Hana said, meaning Bianca, without looking up from her tea. "How do you know?" "Those are her shoes on the stairs. She has a particular way of walking when she doesn't want to be heard. Light in the front. She's done it since she first came here." A pause. "Which was before you arrived, in case you were wondering." "I wasn't still." Mrs. Hana sipped her tea. "Whatever he said to her, she's not leaving tonight." "That's something, I suppose." Zuriya wasn't sure what it was a something of. She was too tired to parse it. Kieran appeared in the doorway of the sitting room at 20 past midnight. He'd taken off his jacket, and the suit was still damp at the shoulders. He looked at Mrs. Hana, and she stood, gathered her cup, and was gone with the efficiency of a woman who had learned to read rooms quickly. Kieran sat down across from Zuriya. He sat the way he always sat, straight still, not taking up more space than necessary, which was strange for a man of his particular presence, like he'd trained himself out of the habit of sprawling. He looked at her face and her hands, and the pendant she was still holding. "Dr. An said the baby's all right," he said. "She did." "And you?" "I've had worse nights." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either, and Kieran seemed to understand that it was the best answer she was capable of right now, so he let it stand. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me nothing. You made a promise to Malcolm. You've kept it. The full story, I mean. There are things I haven't told you that you should probably know." He paused, and in the pause she could see him weighing something, deciding how much the decision he'd already made required him to say. "Not tonight. You need to rest. But soon." Zuriya looked at him. "Is it about why I'm being followed?" He went still. "The sedan," she said. "I've seen it since before I came here. Before you found me. I didn't tell you, because I didn't know if it would." She chose the next word carefully complicate things. Kieran leaned forward slightly. "How many times?" 8. Maybe 9 that I actually confirmed. There might have been more. Color, make, plates if you caught any. Dark blue. Late model, I think a Chevy. Plates were always obscured. Back one, anyway I couldn't see it from the front." Kieran was quiet for a moment. His jaw had... but his hands were still. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. And the question didn't have accusation in it, just a genuine effort to understand. "'Cause I didn't know if knowing would make you remove me from the estate." She looked at him directly. "Or worse, make you feel like I was too dangerous to keep around." The silence that followed was long. "Malcolm's death wasn't a random robbery," Kieran said finally. Zuriya's breath went shallow. She had suspected this. She had suspected it from the first week, from the way the police had asked certain questions and avoided others, from the crime scene details that hadn't fully added up, from the way Malcolm had been careful in the months before he died, in ways he hadn't been before. She had suspected it and not let herself land on it, because landing on it meant that her husband had been murdered intentionally by someone who had a reason, and reasons meant networks, and networks meant that reason might extend to her. "Who?" she said. "I'm still working on that." "Kieran, I need to be certain before I tell you, because the name changes everything." He met her eyes. "What I can tell you is that Malcolm information about someone inside my organization. Financial information, the kind that ends careers and ends lives. He was gathering it carefully, quietly, and I think he didn't tell me because he wasn't sure yet who he could trust." A pause. "Including me, possibly. Did he have reason not to trust you?" "No," said, without hesitation, "but he had reason to be careful." "Those are different things." Zuri absorbed this. The pendant was warm now from being held. "Do you know where the information is?" she asked. No, his eyes went to the pendant, then back to her face. Do you? Malcolm gave me this pendant 4 months before he died. She held it up. He told me not to take it off. I thought he was being sentimental. Kieran looked at the pendant for a long moment, without speaking. Something moved behind his eyes, recognition, maybe, or the beginning of a terrible understanding. Has anyone ever tried to take it from you? Zuriya thought. The studio apartment, the door handle turning at 2 in the morning. She'd thought that was someone trying to break in generally, opportunistic, looking for valuables. Maybe, she said, slowly. Kieran stood up. Don't take it off, he said. Exact same words as Malcolm. Same cadence. I need to make some calls. There's a guard outside your door tonight, Tomas. You know him. He's been on your detail for 6 weeks. You see anyone else in that hallway, you call me, not the security desk. Me, he was moving toward the door. Kieran, he stopped. What's happening? He turned and looked at her, and she saw it then, the thing he'd been managing under the surface since he walked in tonight. Not just the anger at Bianca, not just the concern for her, but something older, heavier. The specific weight of a man who has been running toward a conclusion he can already see and doesn't like. Someone inside my organization ordered Malcolm's death, he said. And whoever did it believes Malcolm left something behind. Something that could destroy them. He looked at the pendant one more time. I think they've been trying to find it for months. He left. The door didn't close all the way, and through the gap Zuriya could see the hallway, and at the end of the hallway Tomas, standing with his back straight, and his hands at his sides, and his face pointed toward the stairs. She sat alone in the sitting room with the tea gone cold, and the rain finished, and the pendant between her fingers, and the full weight of it settling over her. Malcolm had known he might die. He had hidden his evidence with her, not because she was in the best position to find it, but because she was in the worst position to be suspected of having it. Because she was his wife. Because she was pregnant. Because whoever killed him would look at her tired, grieving, financially destroyed, alone and see a loose end, maybe, but not a threat. He had used her, not cruelly, not without love. She understood that. Sitting in that room, she understood it bone deep, the way you understand the worst decisions of people you love, where the intention was clean and the cost was paid by someone else. He had used her because she was the safest hiding place he could think of. And he had died, without telling her, so that she wouldn't carry the knowledge anywhere on her face. She loved him. She was furious at him. Both things sat in her chest simultaneously without resolving. She touched the pendant, oval, engraved pattern, cheap silver plate. She held it up and looked at it properly, for the first time, in the low lamplight of the sitting room, and turned it over and pressed the edge of it with her thumbnail, and felt very faintly where the seam was. She pressed harder. Nothing. She set it back against her collarbone and closed her hand around it. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow she would look at it again, properly in daylight, when her hands had stopped shaking. She was still sitting there when the first of the security alerts went off, 2 floors up, a sharp electronic tone that cut through the quiet house like a blade. Then voices, low and rapid, the specific urgent register of professionals encountering a problem. Then footsteps, not the normal measured footsteps of a guard on rotation, but the fast, purposeful kind. Tomas appeared in the doorway instantly. Ma'am, I need you to move with me now. What's happening? Please. He was already at her side, one hand extended, not touching her, but ready. We need to move. Zuriya stood. She was already reaching for the pendant. Then she stopped reaching and left it where it was around her neck, where Malcolm had put it, and took Tomas's offered arm and let him move her out of the sitting room and down the hall. Behind them, from somewhere in the east wing, she heard Bianca's voice saying Kieran's name, sharp with fear. And then, from somewhere much closer to the ground floor than she expected, she heard something that wasn't the security system. It was glass, breaking inward, and Zuriya understood, moving fast down a dark hallway in a house that had just become something else entirely. That whoever had been following her in a dark blue sedan for the past 4 months had decided tonight was the night they were done being patient. The glass didn't just break. It came apart in a specific way, not the scattered, random sound of something dropped or thrown from inside, but the concentrated implosion of a frame being hit with deliberate force from the outside. The kind of sound that has direction and intent embedded in it. Zuriya had never heard that sound before in her life, and she knew immediately, without needing anyone to explain it, exactly what it meant. Tomas had his phone out before the echo faded. East perimeter, ground floor, library window. He was talking fast, quiet, one hand still bracketing Zuriya's elbow without gripping. Moving the package to secondary now. I need eyes on the east corridor. The package. That was her. She understood that too without needing it explained. They moved through the hallway at a pace that was almost running, but not quite. Tomas keeping her slightly behind him, slightly to his left, his body angled to put himself between her and whatever was behind them. The house was doing something around them that she hadn't witnessed before. Lights were changing. The warm ambient lighting of the hallways shifted to something lower, more directional, and she heard doors closing in sequence, somewhere above them, methodical, coordinated. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Underground level." "There's a secure room. Where's Kieran?" "He's been notified." Which wasn't an answer to what she'd asked. She filed that and kept moving. They passed the kitchen corridor. Through the gap she could see two of the household staff, the overnight cook, a young man named Dario, and one of the cleaning staff being quietly directed by another guard toward a back staircase. Their faces were confused and frightened. Dario caught Zuriya's eye for a half second, and she gave him nothing, because she had nothing to give. She was running on the same fear he was, just dressed differently. The stairs to the underground level were at the end of the East Service corridor, behind a panel that looked like cabinetry. Tomas opened it with a key card and a code and moved her through, and the panel closed behind them with a sound like a vault. The staircase was concrete. The lighting down here was fluorescent and unforgiving. Their footsteps echoed in ways the carpeted upper floors didn't allow for, and the sound of the house above them was muffled but not gone. She could still feel vibrations through the soles of her shoes. A heaviness in the air that might have been footsteps, or might have been her own heartbeat amplified by fear. The secure room was at the end of a short corridor. Metal door, keypad. Inside, a table, 4 chairs, a medical kit mounted on one wall, a small monitor showing 8 camera feeds from around the estate, a landline phone, water, and 2 guards she recognized from the day rotations, who had apparently been stationed here in advance. One of them, a heavy-set man named Reeves, who had once helped her carry grocery boxes from the garage to her apartment without being asked, looked at her stomach when she came in, and then looked at Tomas and said, "Doc been called?" "Already here. She's upstairs, get her down." Tomas was already on his phone again. Zuriya sat at the table and put both hands flat on the surface and looked at the monitor. 8 camera feeds. Most of them showed empty hallways, the exterior grounds in the flat gray of security lighting, the gates. One showed the library on the east side of the first floor. The library window was gone. Not broken gone. The frame had been cleared with something systematic. Through the empty space where glass had been, the camera picked up nothing but dark and rain-wet garden. But the angle was wrong. It was pointing too far left. And she could see at the extreme edge of the frame a shape that might have been a person and might have been a shadow, but moved with purpose, when shadows don't move at all. "How many?" she asked. Reeves looked at her. "How many people came in through that window?" she said. "We're working on establishing that. That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." And he turned back to his radio. She kept her hands flat on the table. Under her palms, the surface was cool, and she focused on the specific temperature of it, the smoothness, something physical and present that wasn't fear. Her back hurt. Her ankles had swollen further from all the movement. The baby had gone still, which sometimes meant sleeping, and sometimes meant the baby was responding to stress the way she was, by going inward. "You're okay," she thought. At it, at him, at the specific presence she'd been carrying for 7 months and talking to in her head for most of that time. "We're okay. Just stay still." The door opened and Kieran came in. He was carrying his jacket now, not wearing it, and had rolled his sleeves back. She could see the tattoos on his forearms, not the deliberate artistic kind. But the Syndicate 9, dense and layered, each one with a history she didn't know, and his hands had something on the knuckles that she didn't want to look at directly. He crossed to the monitor immediately, stood behind Reeves, and looked at all 8 feeds in about 4 seconds. Where are they now? 2 confirmed inside, East Wing, first floor. 3rd unconfirmed Garza thinks he saw movement at the Southgate camera, but it cut out. Cut out how? Signal interference, or someone killed the feed locally. Kieran's jaw moved once. How many of ours are positioned? 6 inside, 3 on perimeter. Liang and Castillo are still coming in from the north side. Tell them to enter through the kitchen passage and hold there. He looked at Zuriya. A specific look quick, landing on her stomach, then her face. Are you all right? Yes. Are you actually all right? Or are you telling me what you think I need to hear right now? She paused. The latter. But I'm functional. Something moved across his face that might, in different circumstances, have been almost like a smile. Dr. On is coming down. She'll stay in here with you. He looked back at the monitor. Nobody opens this door unless it's Tomas, Reeves, or me. Not the other guards. Not Bianca. Not anyone you don't recognize directly. Where is Bianca? East Wing, 2nd floor. We're moving her now. She sounded scared. She should be. He said it without softening it. This is connected to what I told you tonight. Someone found out I was back and didn't want to wait. Someone inside your organization. He looked at her. Yes. Someone who thinks I have what Malcolm hid. Another pause, longer this time. Yes. So they came here tonight because you came back, which means they knew your schedule, which means she stopped. Laid it out in her head the rest of the way, which means whoever this is, they have access to your movements. Someone who knows when you travel and when you return. Kieran looked at her steadily. You've been thinking about this, he said. I've had 3 months of noticing things and not knowing what to do with them. She held his gaze. Who knew you were coming back tonight? Your schedule was disrupted. You weren't supposed to be here. Who knew you changed it? I told 3 people. His voice was very controlled. My driver, my attorney, and my lieutenant. Silence. Reeves was very still at the monitor. Tomas had stopped moving. The room had that specific quality of air in it, when everyone in a space is listening hard to something they're pretending not to hear. Your lieutenant, she said. Victor Dane. He said the name like it cost him something. We've worked together for 11 years. Is he here tonight? On the estate? Kieran's eyes went to the monitor, to the 8 feeds. His jaw set in a way she'd seen on him exactly once before, the night he walked into the dining room and found her on the floor. The specific expression of a person who has looked at a situation and is now deciding what kind of person they need to be about it. He called me 2 hours ago, Kieran said. Told me the situation that sent me away had been resolved. That I should come home. A pause. I thought he was being efficient. The room was very quiet. He told you to come back, Zuriya said. Tonight specifically. Yes. And now there are people in your house. Yes. She didn't say the rest of it out loud because she didn't need to and because the room was already full of it. Reeves had turned back to the monitor, but his shoulders were carrying something new. Tomas was looking at the floor with the careful expression of a man who was going to pretend, for everyone's benefit, that he hadn't been listening. Kieran's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face went through something she couldn't fully read, not shock. He'd moved past shock, but a kind of cold settling, like a temperature drop you feel before you understand its cause. Victor's at the gate, he said. He's requesting entry. He looked up. He says he got a security alert about a perimeter breach and came immediately. The words sat in the room like a weight. He came to help, Tomas said, and he said it in the specific flat voice of a man trying out a sentence to hear how hollow it sounds. He came to finish it, Kieran said, or to watch, or both. He pocketed his phone. He looked at Zuriya. I need you to stay in this room. I need you to not open this door for anyone but the people I named. And I need you to give me the pendant. She went still. Malcolm hid the evidence in it, Kieran said. I should have looked at it properly when you told me about it tonight instead of waiting. That was a mistake. He held out his hand. I'm not going to take it from you. She looked at his hand. At the tattoos across the knuckles, At the something dried on the edge of his thumb she still hadn't identified and didn't want to. If you take it, she said slowly, and something happens to you, whatever's in there is gone. Or it ends up with the wrong person. I know how to secure information. You trusted Victor Dane for 11 years. It landed. She watched it land, watched his hand stay extended, and his face do nothing, and his eyes absorb it. I know, he said. Give it to me anyway. She reached up and unclasped the pendant. It had been around her neck for 4 months, so long that she'd genuinely forgotten the weight of it until now, when its absence left a strange coolness at her collarbone. She put it in his palm. He closed his fingers around it. Then he looked at her one more time, with an expression she couldn't fully catalog, and didn't have time to try, and he left. The door sealed behind him. Dr. Ahn came down 6 minutes later, with a blood pressure cuff and a heartbeat monitor, and the expression of a woman who had accepted, some years ago, that her practice would occasionally involve operating in unusual conditions, and had made her peace with it. She took Zuriya's vitals in silence and said, "Elevated again, but not dangerously. Baby's heartbeat is good." Then she sat down across the table, and they both looked at the monitor together, because there was nothing else to look at. The camera feed showed the house in pieces, corridors, exterior walls, the gate, movement at the edges of several frames, the purposeful movement of Iran's people, and once, in the East Wing hallway feed, something less controlled, something faster and lower to the ground. Then that feed cut out. Reeves was on the radio immediately. East Wing second floor camera is down. I need eyes on that corridor. Chen, come in. Static. Castillo, are you through the kitchen yet? A voice, distant, in position. I need someone on the east second floor right now. Chen is not responding. Zuriya looked at the blank square on the monitor where the east corridor feed had been. Second floor, East Wing. That's Bianca's room, she said. Reeves looked at her, then at the monitor. Then he was on the radio again, and this time his voice had dropped the professional evenness and had something else underneath it. The blank square stayed blank. For 4 minutes, nothing happened, and everything happened in the space of that. Nothing. Reeves talking. Voices on the radio coming back, fragmented and incomplete, doctor. Sitting very still across from Zuriya with her hands folded on the table, the baby moving once in a long, slow roll that felt almost deliberate, like he was reminding her he was still there. Then the door opened. Not Tomas. Not Reeves. The guard who came through was one of the ones she recognized from the day rotation, a young man named Castro, who had occasionally walked her to the greenhouse when she wanted air, a calm and quiet person. He came in fast and looked at Reeves and said, "We have a problem." "How big?" "Bianca Serrano is not in her room." Reeves set down the radio. "Who was on her?" "Park." Castro stopped. "Park is down. East corridor, second floor. He's breathing. He was hit from behind. We think he's concussed. He's conscious, but what about Bianca?" "Gone." The word went around the room. Zuriya felt something go cold and very clear in her chest, the specific clarity that arrives when all the noise stops and you can finally hear the shape of the thing you've been missing. "She's not gone," she said. Everyone looked at her. She wasn't taken. Zuriya looked at the blank monitor square. She left. There's a difference. She held the table edge with both hands and thought it through fast and out loud, because there wasn't time to do it any other way. She knocked out the camera, or someone she let in knocked it out. She's been in this house for months. She knows the layout, the camera positions, the patrol routes. She told you herself she had the override code for Kieran's study. She's been watching this house the same way I have, except with access I didn't have. Castros looked at Reeves. "Where would she go?" Reeves said. "She'd go where the thing she came for is." Zuriya pushed back from the table and stood up. Dr. Ahn made a sound of protest. "Where is Kieran right now?" "Exactly where?" "Ma'am, you need to— Where is he?" Castro had his radio up. "K1, what's your position?" "K1, respond." The radio gave them static and then Kieran's voice, tight garage level. "Victor" is a pause. Something in the background, a sound she couldn't identify. "Victor is here. We have a secondary situation," Castro said. "Serrano is missing." Repeat, Serrano is not in her room. A silence on the radio that was 3 seconds long and felt much longer. Then Kieran said, "Lock down the garage now." And the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a gradual fade. All of them at once. The fluorescence above, the monitor, the small indicator lights on the keypad by the door, everything in a single cut, and the underground room was perfectly and completely dark. Dr. On made a sharp intake of breath. Reeves was already moving. She could hear him, the scrape of his chair, his footsteps, the specific sounds of a professional operating by feel, in a space he'd been trained to work in without light. A beam of a flashlight cut across the room, then another. "Emergency power should kick in," Castro said. "It's not kicking in," Reeves said. "It should be. I know what it should be doing." Zuriya stood with her hand on the table edge, and her eyes adjusting to the dark, and her heart doing something that wasn't panic exactly, but was a close and unpleasant neighbor to it. Through the thick door she could feel, more than hear, the vibrations of the house above them, and those vibrations were wrong, too many of them, in the wrong rhythm, with occasional hard stops that her body translated before her mind did. That was gunfire. She had never heard it from this distance, and through this much insulation, and she would not have known what it was, except that her body knew it anyway, the way bodies know certain things without being taught. The radio in Reeves's hand came alive. Multiple contacts, north corridor, we need, and then it broke apart into static and silence again. Reeves pointed his flashlight at Castro. "Stay with her. Don't open that door. You're leaving? I'm going to the power junction at the end of the corridor. It's 30 feet. I'll be back in 2 minutes." He looked at Zuriya. "Do not open this door." He left. The door sealed again. Castro stood between Zuriya and the door, with the second flashlight pointed at the floor. And his other hand, she noticed this. She noticed everything right now resting on the holster at his hip. Not drawing, just resting. Dr. On had moved to stand beside Zuriya with a hand on her arm. Light pressure. Steadying. 60 seconds passed. The vibrations in the ceiling continued, irregular and awful. Then Castro's radio crackled. Castro. It was Tomas's voice, from somewhere that echoed differently than the house above. "Castro, I need you to listen carefully. Go ahead." Reeves is down. Someone was already at the power junction. Castro's hand moved from resting on the holster to gripping it. "Tomas, what's your position?" "I'm at the east staircase, underground level. There are 2 of Victor's people between me and the secure room. I cannot reach you by the direct route." A pause, and in the pause was the sound of breathing and something else, something strained. "Castro, Victor's in the garage with Mr. Ryu. Bianca Serrano is also in the garage." She went to him. She went directly to Victor Dane. Zuriya closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, Castro was looking at her. She looked back. "Bianca," she said, and it wasn't a question. She was just saying it out loud, setting it down in the room like a fact that needed to exist in air to be real. She went to Victor. She went to Victor, Castro confirmed, and his voice was careful in the way voices get when someone is trying to manage the impact of information they know is going to hit hard. "How long?" Zuriya asked. "How long has she been?" "We don't know. Guess." Castro shook his head slightly. Not refusing, he genuinely didn't know. But the shape of it was becoming visible to Zuriya with a horrible, incremental clarity, the way a picture emerges from static when you look long enough. Bianca watching her. Bianca asking about Malcolm's work. Bianca going through Kieran's study, not because she was jealous, but because she was looking for the same thing Victor was looking for. Bianca, keeping Zuriya standing, exhausted, visible, engaged not cruelty for cruelty's sake, but cruelty as distraction, cruelty as misdirection, making Zuriya the center of attention, while Bianca moved through the edges of the frame. 3 months. She had been inside this house for 3 months. The rumors, Zuriya said. Victor fed Bianca rumors about me and Kieran. That's what Kieran said tonight. She was thinking out loud again. Faster now, the cold clarity expanding. But what if it wasn't feeding her rumors? What if Victor already knew her? What if the rumors were a story they built together, give Bianca a reason to resent me, to search the house, to get close to Kieran's private things? While Victor stayed outside it, Castro said, "Clean." distance, deniability, and Bianca believed it was her own jealousy. She stopped. Or she didn't believe it was jealousy at all and didn't care. The radio crackled again. Tomas, Castro, I have a route through the service tunnel, but I need you to open the access panel from your side. It's behind the medical kit on the east wall. Castro moved to the wall, ran his flashlight over it, found the panel. A small recessed handle, painted over, barely visible unless you were looking. Got it. Don't open it yet. Wait for my signal. A pause. And Castro, tell her the garage is on the monitors in the security hub on the main floor. If anyone can reach the hubs, they can see what's happening in that garage. Mr. Ryu specifically said, I know what he said. I'm telling you what's in the building. Another pause. It's her call. Castro looked at Zuriya. She was already looking at the door. Upstairs. Through 2 floors of compromised house, with 2 of Victor's people between here and the east staircase. With the lights out and the radio fragmented and her body at 30 weeks and every professional in this building having told her explicitly to stay in this room. Karen was in the garage with Victor. Victor who had sent him home tonight. Victor who had arranged for his return at the exact moment the breach was planned. Victor who had killed Malcolm and had been looking for the pendant for months and had not found it, and had now, tonight with Bianca's help and the element of surprise, maneuvered Kieran to exactly the place he wanted him. The garage, underground, enclosed, surrounded by Victor's people. With the evidence, the pendant she'd just handed over in Kieran's pocket. She thought about Malcolm, not sentimentally, not the soft focus way she'd been letting herself think about him over the past months, the selective grief that kept the good parts lit and the complicated parts in shadow. She thought about him clearly, the way you finally think about someone when you stop protecting yourself from the full truth of who they were. He had hidden evidence of a conspiracy in a piece of jewelry around his pregnant wife's neck and had died without telling her. He had made one man responsible for her safety while knowing that man's organization was compromised. He had put her in the center of something and relied on her being underestimated. He had not been wrong. She had been underestimated by everyone in this building from the moment she arrived. By Bianca, who saw only a pregnant intruder to be managed. By Victor, who saw a grieving widow, too broken to be a threat. Even by Kieran, a little not cruelly, not dismissively, but in the specific way that people underestimate those they are trying to protect, confusing safety with stillness. She had been still long enough. Castro, she said. Ma'am, if I go upstairs and reach this security hub, how long do I have before Victor's people find me? I don't know. Too many variables. Estimate. He was quiet for a moment. Professional assessment. If the 2 in the east corridor are stationary and waiting for instruction, maybe 4 minutes. If they're mobile, less. And if Tomas comes through that panel, he can hold this position? Yes. And Dr. An stays here. Dr. An opened her mouth. No, Zuriya said, firm, not unkind. You stay here. This isn't discussion, doctor. An looked at her for a long moment, and whatever she saw in Zuriya's face, the resolution, the specific kind of calm that is not calmness at all, but is what you're left with, when fear has been fully processed and accepted, she closed her mouth. Zuriya looked at the door. She was not fast. She hadn't been fast in 2 months. Her center of gravity was wrong. Her ankles hurt. Her back had been aching since morning, and she was going to walk through a compromised building in the dark toward a garage full of armed people, because the alternative was sitting in a room waiting to find out what happened. Malcolm had not waited. He had worked quietly, carefully, from the inside of the thing that was killing him, and he had built a case and hidden the pieces with the people he trusted most, and it had cost him everything. But the pieces were still there. She was still there. Open the panel, she said to Castro. Get Tomas in here. She picked up the spare flashlight from the table, and then opened the door. Castro looked at her for one more second. Then he turned to the east wall and knocked twice on the panel. From behind it, 2 answering knocks. He opened it. Tomasos came through the service tunnel with blood on his sleeve and his weapon drawn and took in the room in a single sweep. He looked at Zuriya with a flashlight in her hand, and something crossed his face surprise. Then the rapid suppression of it, Then something that might have been, beneath everything professional about him, a specific and reluctant respect. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know," Zuriya said. He stepped aside. Castro opened the door, and the dark corridor beyond it swallowed the thin beam of her flashlight, and Zuriya walked through it because Malcolm had put his evidence in her hands and trusted her to carry it to the end. And because Kieran was in a garage with a man who had already killed once to get what he wanted, and because she was done being the thing in the room that everyone else made decisions around. What? She moved through the dark. Behind her, the door sealed shut. Ahead of her, at the end of the corridor, the stairs led up into a house, where everything had already become something else entirely, and she climbed them one at a time with one hand on the wall, and her jaw set, in the empty place at her collarbone, where the pendant had been, and somewhere above her, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and money, and the specific fear of cornered men, Victor Dane was standing across from Kieran Ryu, with 11 years of loyalty already on the floor, between them like a body. The staircase was 12 steps and felt like 40. Zuriya counted them the way you count things, when your body is doing something your mind hasn't fully agreed to, yet one number at a time, each one a small commitment, each one closing off the option of going back. Her hand stayed on the wall. The flashlight beam moved with her, narrow and insufficient, cutting a pale strip through the dark, while everything outside it stayed perfectly black. At the top of the stairs she stopped and listened. The house had a sound, now that it hadn't had 3 hours ago. Not loud, almost the opposite. A compressed, tight silence, with things moving inside it the way water sounds when it's running fast under ice. Somewhere to her right, maybe 60 feet, she heard a voice say something clipped and terse, and then stop. Footsteps, 2 sets, going away from her. She went left. The security hub was on the main floor, north side, behind the kitchen. She'd been there once, 6 weeks ago, when one of the exterior cameras had malfunctioned in Mrs. Hannah had asked her to walk the technician through the house since Mrs. Hannah herself had a scheduling conflict. She remembered the route. She remembered the door, heavy, reinforced, looked like a utility closet from the outside, no markings. She remembered thinking at the time that it was designed to be invisible to anyone who didn't already know it was there. She moved through the dark with the flashlight off. This was a decision that cost her. Without the light, she had to slow down considerably, one hand trailing the wall, feet testing each step before committing weight. But the light was worse. A moving beam in a dark house announced her position to anyone with eyes, and she was 7 months pregnant and could not run. And the only advantage she had in this building right now was that Victor's people were almost certainly not looking for her. They were looking for Kieran. They were positioned around the garage. They had put 2 people in the east corridor to block the route between the underground secure room and wherever Victor needed access, which meant they'd planned for a rescue attempt from below. He caused not for a 30 weeks pregnant woman moving through the north wing of the main floor in complete darkness. She moved slowly. She kept her breathing even. She counted doorways. The kitchen corridor was third on the left. She felt the temperature change before she reached it. The kitchen held ambient warmth, even at midnight, residual heat from the evening's cooking, and the smell of it was coffee and garlic and something sweet, completely incongruous with everything happening in the rest of the building, a domestic's smell that hit her with a strange and almost painful normalcy. She went through the kitchen, around the center island, past the walk-in cold storage, whose door she could feel as a change in air temperature, past the rack of copper pans she'd bumped once, weeks ago, and sent clattering across the floor in a moment of extreme embarrassment. She did not bump them now. The utility corridor on the far side of the kitchen was 10 feet long and ended in the door. She found it by feel the specific texture of it, heavier than the doors around it, set slightly deeper in the frame. The keypad beside it, she couldn't see at all. She pressed her hand against it and felt the number grid under her fingertips. She did not know the code. She stood in the dark and breathed and thought. She had watched the technician enter the code 6 weeks ago, from approximately 4 feet away, to her left, and slightly behind, at an angle that should have been too oblique to read. She had not been trying to read it. She had been making conversation with him about the camera system, while simultaneously noticing the way she always noticed things in this house, the sequence of his fingers on the pad. 4 numbers, his right hand, pinky to index, low to high on the grid, then one in the middle. She placed her fingers on the pad, pressed. The door opened. She stood there for a second, with the specific disorientation of someone who prepared themselves for failure and got something else. Then she went in and closed the door behind her and turned on the flashlight. The security hub was a small room with 2 chairs, a main console, 3 monitors that were currently dark. The power cut had taken them with everything else, and a backup system on the right wall with a separate power supply. A red indicator light on the backup unit was the only light in the room before she turned on the flashlight, which meant the backup was functional. Which meant the people who cut the main power either didn't know about it or couldn't reach it from wherever they'd cut the feed. She crossed to the backup unit. It had a manual override panel with labeled switches. She'd seen the technician reference this panel too. He'd mentioned it in passing while she was asking about something else. The offhand way people mention technical details they don't expect anyone to remember or care about. She cared about everything. She found the switch labeled Garage Lower B2 and flipped it. One of the 3 monitors came on. It showed the garage in the flat, slightly greenish tint of night vision security cameras. 4 feeds, tiled. She could see, in the largest of them, the space, as she'd registered it once, when Kieran had briefly walked her through the property in her first week, a wide, high-ceilinged space with 6 or 7 vehicles arranged in 2 rows. The floors polished concrete, the lighting usually overhead fluorescents that were now, like everything else in the building, off. But not dark. Someone had brought lights, portable work lights, the kind on tripods, positioned at the center of the garage space. Harsh, directional, creating a bright center and leaving the vehicle rows in shadow. In the light, 6 people that she could count. 4 of them were positioned at the cardinal points of the space, weapons in hand, facing inward. The posture of containment, of people who had already secured the situation and were now waiting for it to conclude. In the center, 2 men, Kieran and Victor Dane. She had seen Victor once at a distance, arriving for a meeting she'd had no part of, and once briefly in the hallway near Kieran's study when he'd been leaving and she'd been arriving, and they'd exchanged the minimal acknowledgement of 2 people who occupied the same building without sharing anything. She knew him by type before she knew him by face, mid-40s, broad through the shoulders, the kind of physical presence that had once been imposing and had softened slightly around the edges without losing the core. He wore authority the way men do when they've had it long enough that it's settled into their posture. He was holding a gun, not pointed held, at his side, loose, the body language of a man who wanted the option visible without making it feel like a standoff. This was a conversation he wanted to have first. The gun was punctuation, not the sentence. Kieran was standing 6 feet away from him with his jacket off, sleeves still rolled back, and his hands visible at his sides. No weapon that she could see, though she knew from the way he was positioned weight slightly back. Feet not quite parallel, that he was managing the distance between them, yin, with the specific geometry of someone who has fought in small spaces before and is doing the math. She couldn't hear them. She looked at the console. There was an audio feed. The technician had tested it, a row of speakers along the bottom panel and a volume dial. She found the dial in the dark and turned it. Doesn't change what you have in your pocket. Victor's voice came through the speaker with a slight echo, the acoustics of a concrete room. Give it to me and this ends clean. Clean, Kieran's voice. That's an interesting word for tonight. I'm trying to give you a way out of this. You sent me home to walk into this. I sent you home because I need what Malcolm left. I don't need you dead. I never wanted Victor's stop. Start it again. 11 years, Kieran. 11 years I built what you have. I put this organization together piece by piece while you were learning how to run it. I fronted money that wasn't mine to front. I made deals with people I couldn't afford to make enemies of. I know what you did. Then you know what I'm owed. I know what you took. Kieran's voice was very even. That terrible evenness she'd heard in the dining room. Except now it had something else underneath it, not anger exactly, but a grief that had already finished processing and was now on the other side of itself, cold and clear. Malcolm found the accounts, Victor. All of them. 4 years of it. You weren't building anything. You were building your exit while I was paying for the doors. Victor was quiet for a moment. Malcolm should have come to me, he said finally. Malcolm went to me, which is why you killed him. A silence on the monitor that was 5 seconds long and felt like a verdict being read. That wasn't supposed to happen the way it did, Victor said. Kieran moved, not toward Victor sideways. One step, a repositioning that changed the angle between them. Don't. I'm telling you. Don't tell me what it was supposed to be. The evenness cracked, just at the edge, like a line in glass that hasn't fully broken yet. He had a wife. He had a child coming. He was the only person in 20 years who
Stop!
closed the crack, sealed it. When he spoke again, it was controlled. Give me one reason why I should hand you that pendant. Because there are 4 guns in this room, and one of them is mine, and I know where the other 3 are pointed. Zuriya's eyes went to the 4 positioned gunmen on the monitor. All 4 facing inward. All 4 from their positions, with a line of sight to Kieran that Victor did not share. She looked at this for a moment. Then she looked at the console panel. Below the audio controls, below the camera feed selectors, there was a section of panels sold in small print, emergency authorized personnel only. Under that label, 3 switches and a covered button. She read the labels: lockdown upper, lockdown lower. Garage barrier. She stared at the 3rd one. She put her hand over the cover. On the monitor, Victor stepped closer to Kieran. The pendant, he said. Kieran looked at him. Victor, a new voice on the feed, from somewhere at the edge of the camera's frame. She couldn't see the speaker. Victor, we need to move. Tomas got through the South Service tunnel. We've got maybe 4 minutes before. We're fine, Victor said without looking away from Kieran. We're not fine, I said we're fine. And then, to Kieran last time. Zuriya's hand was on the covered button. She looked at the monitor. The 4 positioned gunmen, Victor at the center. Kieran 6 feet away with the pendant in his pocket, and 4 weapons calibrated to the space he was standing in. She lifted the cover. On the monitor, she watched Kieran's right hand move slowly to his jacket pocket. She pressed the button. The garage barrier was a security feature she'd heard mentioned, exactly once in passing, by the technician, as an anti-theft measure reinforced panels built into the floor and ceiling of the garage that could be raised remotely to separate the vehicle bays from each other and from the main access points. They had been installed, the technician had said, at the request of a previous owner who had very specific anxieties about very specific scenarios. She watched on the monitor as the panels came up, not fast, not dramatically. They rose with the hydraulic certainty of something engineered to be something unstoppable. 4-inch thick steel barriers emerging from channels in the polished concrete floor, and the sound of them, a deep mechanical groan that she could feel through the floor of the security hub. 2 levels above went through the garage and through the people in it like a physical thing. The 4 gunmen were on the wrong side of 2 of the barriers. Victor was on the same side as Kieran. One of the barriers came up between Victor and his nearest gunman in the time it took the gunman to take 2 steps toward them. She watched Kieran understand what had happened in real time, watched it move across his face on the monitor, in the flat greenish light, the recalibration, the reading of the new geometry. He had half a second, and he used it completely. He moved. Not away from Victor, toward him. Inside the arm with the gun, before Victor had finished processing the barrier behind him, one hand going to Victor's wrist, the other driving an elbow into Victor's collarbone, with the compact efficiency of a man who has won and lost fights in small spaces, and knows the difference between the two is usually measured in half seconds. Victor's gun hit the concrete. The sound of it carried clearly through the audio feed, and Zuriya flinched back from the speaker instinctively. What followed on the monitor was not clean or composed, or the way fights look in movies. It was 2 men in a concrete room with portable work lights throwing hard shadows. And Victor was bigger, and Kieran was faster, and both of them were bleeding from things that had happened before the camera could see them, and there was nothing elegant about any of it. It was close and ugly and exhausting to watch. The kind of fighting that is about endurance as much as skill, about who runs out of something first. She needed to get down there. She took the flashlight and left the hub. The north corridor was still dark. She moved through it fast, faster than she'd been moving, her hand on the wall, her jaws set against the low, insistent ache in her back and the tightening in her lower abdomen that she was choosing actively and deliberately not to pay attention to right now because there was nothing she could do about it except keep moving. She reached the kitchen, through it, into the east corridor. Two figures in the dark. Ahead of her, she stopped. They hadn't heard her yet. She'd had the flashlight off. She could see them as shapes, slightly darker than the darkness, close together and facing away from her, toward the east staircase. Victor's people, the two Tomas had said, were blocking the corridor. Her heart did something it had been threatening to do for the past 10 minutes. She pressed her back against the wall and did not move and did not breathe and counted to 3. The shapes didn't turn. She exhaled slowly. There was a door 3 feet to her, left a linen storage room. She'd been in it twice. She put her hand on the handle and opened it with a slowness that required everything she had. The old hinges that could creak given the wrong pressure, and she managed it without a sound and stepped inside and pulled it nearly closed behind her and stood in the small dark room between shelves of folded tablecloths and waited. Her radio, she didn't have one. She had a flashlight and a door code she'd read over a technician's shoulder 6 weeks ago and a memory for detail that people consistently failed to account for. She took out her phone. Still had a signal weak, 1 bar, the building interfering. She typed a text to the only number she had that mattered right now and hit send and watched the indicator spin. It delivered. 20 seconds later, her phone vibrated once. The reply was 2 words, hold position. She held position. 3 minutes passed. They were the longest 3 minutes she could remember, longer even than the minutes in the dining room. Longer than the minutes after Malcolm's phone had gone to voicemail 4 times in a row, and she'd understood without being told that something was very wrong. At least in those minutes, she hadn't known exactly what was happening. Now she knew, and couldn't see it, and couldn't reach it, and was standing between tablecloths in a linen closet, listening to her own breathing, and the baby's movement, and the distant sounds of a house she'd been trying to survive for 3 months, tearing itself apart around her. The voices in the corridor outside shifted. One of Victor's men said something sharp, and the other responded, and then there were footsteps, fast, going east, away from her. Something had drawn them. She opened the linen room door. The corridor was empty. She moved. The garage access was down 1 flight, a separate staircase from the service stairs, access through a door near the south end of the east corridor. She took it, pushing through the door and onto the staircase, and descended with 1 hand on the rail. The sounds reached her before she reached the bottom. Voices. Multiple. The specific high-tension register of an aftermath people, talking fast, overlapping, the kind of communication that happens when a situation has just changed and everyone is updating their information simultaneously. Not the sounds of fighting. The sounds of fighting ending. She came through the door at the base of the staircase. The garage barriers were still up. She could see them from where she stood. The steel panels bisecting the space, the 4 gunmen on the far side of 2 of them, with a 3rd barrier between them and the door she'd just come through. They were not going anywhere immediately. On her side of the barriers, Kieran. He was on his feet, barely. He had 1 hand on the side mirror of the nearest vehicle, a black SUV. He was breathing with his whole body, the kind of breathing that comes after you've asked your body for everything it has. His shirt was torn at the collar, and he had blood on his face from a cut above his eye that was still running. Victor Dane was on the ground, not dead. She could see his chest moving. He was on his side, with his wrist at a wrong angle, and his face turned away from her, and two of Kieran standing over him with the careful positioning of men making sure someone stays where they are. Tomas was there. Leong was there. Castillo was there. 4 other people she recognized from the day rotation, all armed, all breathing hard in the way of people who had been running. Kieran looked up when he heard her on the stairs. He looked at her for a moment in the flat portable light glare, and she looked back at him, and she was aware, distantly, that she had just climbed and walked through a compromised building in the dark at 30 weeks pregnant, and was now standing in a garage where a man was on the ground and 4 armed people were trapped behind a steel barrier, and that none of this was a situation she could have imagined for herself 6 months ago, and that she was not particularly frightened anymore. Not because the fear was gone, but because she was past the point where it was useful. "The button," Kieran said. His voice was rough, scraped raw. "That was you." "Yes." He looked at her for another second. Then he said, "The barriers will drop automatically in 11 minutes when the emergency cycle ends." "Tomas." "On it." Tomas was already moving to position. Kieran pushed off the vehicle and walked toward her, and she could see the effort it took. The managed pace of someone working past damage they weren't ready to fully account for. He stopped 2 feet from her. "You were supposed to stay in the secure room," he said. "Yes. I told you specifically. You were about to hand him the pendant with 4 guns on you." He closed his mouth. I watched it on the monitor in the security hub. She met his eyes. "I wasn't going to sit in a room and wait to find out how that ended." A long pause. "You know the code to the hub," he said. "I watched the technician enter it 6 weeks ago." He looked at her face. Something moved in his expression past the blood and the exhaustion and the specific flatness of a man who has just survived something that required him to be a particular kind of person. Something that had no name. She could immediately put to it, but was not nothing. "Bianca," she said. "Where is Bianca?" The something in his expression changed. "We don't know," he said. Behind him, on the ground, Victor Dane made a sound. Not words. Just a sound, the involuntary noise of someone moving into pain. His wrist. Zuriya looked at it and looked away. "She was with you," she said to Victor, without moving toward him. Victor turned his face toward her. His expression was the mask of a man who had planned for many outcomes and had encountered one he hadn't. "Mrs. Cole," he said. His voice was intact, which she found both impressive and infuriating. "I have a great deal of respect for how you've managed the last few hours. Where is Bianca Serrano?" "I don't know." "You're lying." "Probably." He shifted slightly on the concrete, and the shift cost him something in the wrist, and he absorbed it. "She was supposed to stay at the east staircase until my people secured the situation. She apparently made a different decision. What was she supposed to do after?" Victor looked at Kieran instead of Zuriya. "She was supposed to leave with me," he said. He stopped. "Say it," Kieran said. "It was not a request. She's been working with me for 8 months, since before she got close to you." Another pause. "I introduced you, in case you'd forgotten. I arranged the introduction at the Meridian event." He looked at the floor. "I needed someone inside the house. Someone with legitimate access who wasn't on your payroll and wasn't known in the organization. Someone who could move through your life without tripping your security reads." The garage was very quiet. You built her cover," Zuriya said. "I gave her a framework. She built her own cover. Victor seemed to be choosing words. "She's better than I gave her credit for, honestly. The jealousy angle was her idea, more organic than anything I would have constructed." "The jealousy angle," Kieran repeated. She understood that a woman displaying obvious emotional possessiveness would be read by everyone in this house as a petty personal problem rather than an operational role. He looked up at Kieran. "Including you. You spent 3 months managing her as a domestic situation. Not once did you stop." Kieran's voice had the flatness back. "Stop talking." Victor stopped. In the silence, Tomas said quietly from across the garage, "The barriers will cycle down in 9 minutes. We need to decide about the 4 on the other side before that happens." Kieran looked at Zuriya. She didn't know why he looked at her. Maybe he didn't know either, but he did, and she held it. And she thought about what she knew about Victor and Bianca and 8 months of careful construction and Malcolm dead on a street that was supposed to be a robbery. And she said, "The pendant. Where is it?" Kieran reached into his pocket. The oval of silver came out in his fingers, tarnished a little now, scuffed from whatever had happened in the last hour. He held it in his palm. In the worklight glare, it looked like nothing cheap, small, the kind of thing you'd sell for $3 at a market stall. "Malcolm put something inside it," she said. I know, he turned it over. I couldn't get it open. She took it from him. She held it, the way she'd held it 10,000 times without knowing what it was by the edges, thumb pressed to the back. She found the seam she'd found before, the slight impression where the oval separated into two halves. She pressed firmly with her thumbnail at the point where the seam was deepest and heard, very faintly, a click. The pendant opened. Inside, in a recess that was barely a centimeter deep, was a chip, smaller than her smallest fingernail, matte black. The kind of thing that contained, in the modern alchemy of data storage, not grams but gigabytes. The kind of thing a man who worked in finance and knew exactly how to hide money could use to hide, instead, the evidence of where the money had gone. She held it up in the worklight. Kieran looked at it. Victor, on the ground, went very still. And then, from somewhere above them, from somewhere in the house, from the north side where she'd just come from a direction and a distance that made no immediate sense, came 3 gunshots in rapid sequence. And then a silence that was somehow worse than the shots had been. And then Tomas was already running for the staircase door, and Liang was behind him, and Kieran turned away from the pendant and the chip and all of it, and looked at the ceiling as if he could see through it, and said a single word that wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but that filled the whole garage with the specific weight of a man who has run out of the particular resource that lets you absorb one more thing without breaking. He said, Bianca, and Zuriya closed her fingers around the chip and looked at the staircase door swinging shut behind Tomas and understood, with a clarity that left no room for comfort or reassurance, that the thing they had not accounted for, the one variable that Victor had built, and Kieran had miscalculated, and she had almost solved for, but not quite, had just made its own decision in a room somewhere above them. And whatever that decision was, the sound of 3 gunshots in an already compromised building at 1 a.m. with a man on the garage floor and 4 armed strangers 60 seconds from the barriers coming down meant that every plan still standing in this building had just been rewritten by someone none of them could currently see. Zuriya put the chip in the pocket of her dress. She looked at Kieran. He was already moving toward the stairs. She followed him, because the only thing worse than going up there was standing still while someone else decided how this ended, and she had been letting other people decide things for long enough that the habit of it had finally, completely, and she thought permanently, run out. The staircase up from the garage was narrow, and Kieran took it fast, 3 steps ahead of Zuriya, and she could see the tension in his back, the specific rigidity of a person who is moving toward something they are afraid of finding and cannot stop themselves from moving toward anyway. The door at the top opened into the east service corridor. The corridor was empty. The darkness was the same flat black it had been all night, the emergency lighting still out, and Tomas was 20 feet ahead, with his flashlight cutting the dark in a moving beam. Liang was behind him. They were both moving toward the north end of the corridor, toward the kitchen, toward the direction the shots had come from. Kieran caught up to Tomas in 4 long strides. Where? He said. North sitting room. Castillo is already. How many shots? 3. No return fire that we heard. They went through the kitchen without slowing. The copper pans caught the edge of Tomas's flashlight beam as they passed, and threw brief, fragmented light across the ceiling. And Zuriya followed it with her eyes without meaning to, and then pulled her attention to the corridor, the pace. The north sitting room was the room she had sat in with Mrs. Hana 3 hours ago, drinking tea that went cold, while Kieran and Bianca had their conversation down the hall. She knew its dimensions. She knew where the furniture was. She knew the lamp that didn't sit quite flush with the wall and the armchair with the loose leg that Mrs. Hana had been asking for weeks to have repaired. She also knew, as they came to the doorway, and Tomas stopped with his weapon up and Kieran stepped through, that the sitting room felt different from 6 feet away in the dark. It felt occupied in the specific way of a space where something had recently concluded. Tomas went in first. Liang flanked the doorway. Kieran stepped through, and Zuriya was behind him, close, her hand on the doorframe. Castillo was inside, kneeling beside the far wall, his flashlight directed downward. In the beam, Bianca Serrano, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up, and a gun in her right hand that she was holding loosely, not pointing at anything. The grip of someone who has already done what they came to do and hasn't decided yet what to do next. She was not shot. She was not bleeding. The gun was Victor's. Zuriya recognized it from the monitor, the same one he'd been holding at his side, the same matte finish, the same size. Bianca must have taken it when she left the garage, or Victor had given it to her before the breach began. Either way, she had it, and it was in her hand, and the 3 shots had come from this room, and there was no one else here. Kieran looked at Bianca, then he looked at the window. The glass was intact. He looked at the ceiling. 3 holes in the plaster, closely spaced, about 8 feet up. She'd fired into the ceiling. 3 times. Controlled spacing, deliberate pattern. "You fired up," Tomas said. Not quite a question. Bianca's eyes went to him. "I needed you to come here." Her voice was flat, scraped of whatever had animated it earlier in the night. "All of you. I needed everyone in this house to come to this room." "Why?" Kieran said. She looked at him. In the flat beam of the flashlight, she looked like a different person than the woman who had stood over Zuriya in the dining room. Not softened, something more fundamental than that. Stripped. The performance of Bianca Serrano, which had been operating at full efficiency for 8 months and had unraveled over the course of a single night, was entirely gone. And what was underneath it was exhausted and hollowed out, and not what Zuriya had expected. She looked scared. Not the fear of violence. Not physical fear. The fear of someone who has made a series of decisions in sequence, each one sensible within the logic of the last, and has arrived at a place they did not fully model when they started and cannot now find the exit from. "Victor's people in the garage," Bianca said. "When the barriers come down. You need everyone you have positioned before that happens." She looked at Kieran steadily. "That's why I fired. That's all." Silence. "That's all," Kieran repeated. "Yes, after 8 months of, I know what I did." She said it without flinching and without apology and without the particular collapse that people sometimes perform when they want you to see contrition. She said it like a fact. "I know exactly what I did, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. I'm telling you that right now, tonight, in this room, I am not trying to hurt anyone." Tomas looked at Kieran, a question without words. Kieran looked at the gun in Bianca's hand. "Put it on the floor," he said. She set it on the floor and pushed it toward him with 2 fingers. He didn't pick it up immediately. He looked at it, and then looked at her, and then said, "You helped Victor get into my house." "Yes. You knocked out my guard. I hit him with the base of a lamp. He's concussed, not... You disabled the East Corridor camera." "Yes. And you were going to leave tonight. With Victor." Bianca's jaw moved. A small adjustment, something working behind her teeth. That was the plan. What changed? She looked at Zuriya. Zuriya had not moved from the doorway. She was still with one hand on the frame, her weight distributed the way it needed to be, watching Bianca with an attention she wasn't trying to hide. She let herself be looked at. "I heard the barriers go up," Bianca said. "In the garage. I was at the east staircase. I was supposed to wait." She stopped. Restarted. "Victor's people came past me, running toward the garage, toward the barrier rounds, and I went to the security hub camera feed. There's a small monitor in the sub-panel in the east corridor. Most people don't know it's there. I found it in the 3rd week." She looked at Kieran. "I saw what happened in the garage. I saw Victor on the ground." A pause. "And I saw her." Her eyes went back to Zuriya, standing in the garage. 30 weeks pregnant. She'd come through the house alone to get to that hub. Bianca's voice was very even. Too even, the way voices get when emotion has been compressed into a very small space. "Victor told me she was nothing. He told me she was a loose end that Malcolm had left behind, that she stopped. He told me a lot of things about her, and you believed them," Zuriya said. "I used them." Bianca looked at her without flinching. "There's a difference. I used them because they gave me a reason to be who I needed to be in this house. Jealous girlfriend. Territorial. Pettily cruel. The word landed the way she meant it to. It was a character that served a purpose. I was supposed to look like someone's personal problem, not like an operative." "You succeeded," Zuriya said. A pause. I did. The room was very quiet. Kieran picked up the gun from the floor. He checked it with Practiced Efficiency magazine, chamber, and held it at his side. Where were you going to go? He asked. After tonight. Where was Victor taking you? Out of the country. There were accounts set up. A property outside the jurisdiction. With the information from the pendant. With the information from the pendant, yes. Victor had buyers for it. Not just the cover-up the whole network. People who pay very well for the ability to dismantle organizations they compete with. She looked at her hands, at her palms, and then back up. I didn't know about Malcolm until 6 months in. Victor told me a man had been removed who was a threat to the operation. He didn't use the word killed. He never used that word. Her voice didn't tremble, but something shifted in the breath beneath it. When I found the photographs in Kieran's study, when I saw who Malcolm was to him, I understood what removed meant. And you kept going, Kieran said. She stopped, started again. I'd already done things that couldn't be undone. When you're that far in, the exit you came through doesn't exist anymore. Leong moved at the doorway. Tomas's radio crackled a voice. Urgent barriers cycling down in 90 seconds. Kieran looked at Tomas. Take everyone you have to the garage. Hold the 4 until I get there. Tomas was already moving, Liang behind him. To Castillo, still kneeling near Bianca. Stay here. Then to Bianca, don't move from this room. He looked at Zuriya, and she followed him back into the corridor. They went quickly, his pace slightly uneven from whatever had happened in the garage that he was not addressing, his right side carrying something it wasn't fully acknowledging. She kept up. She's telling the truth, Zuriya said. Quietly, just for him. About some of it. About tonight. She fired to bring you up. She could have been gone. She knew where the exits were. She'd clearly mapped this whole house. She stayed. I know it doesn't change what she did. She kept her voice flat and honest. I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm telling you what she did tonight because it's relevant and you need accurate information. He glanced at her sideways as they moved. You're very calm. I'm exhausted, she said. Calm and exhausted looked the same from the outside. Something moved across his face briefly. That might have been, in a different night, on a different version of this conversation. Something close to a laugh. The garage was controlled chaos when they arrived. The barriers had cycled down, and Tomas had his people in position before the 4 gunmen had managed to reorient. 3 of them were now restrained zip ties, wrists behind them, on their knees beside the second vehicle row. The 4th had apparently tried to run for the vehicle bay door and had been stopped by Castillo's replacement. Victor was still on the ground, propped now against the rear wheel of the black SUV, wrist wrapped with someone's belt in a field compress that was managing the brake without addressing it. He looked up when Kieran came in. He looked at Kieran. Then he looked at Zuriya, standing behind him. Then at her hands, at her pockets, at the place where the pendant was not. The chip, Victor said, is no longer your problem, Kieran said. Kieran. Victor's voice was remarkably, still attempting reason. After everything, still attempting the register of 2 men who could talk their way to an understanding. Whatever you're planning to do with that information, you need to think about what it exposes. It's not just me. There are names on that chip that reach into minutes. I know what's on it. Then you know that handing it to anyone creates a situation that comes back to you, to this organization. I know, Kieran said. I've thought about it. Victor went quiet. My attorney has been building a parallel case for 3 months, Kieran said. Not from the chip independently. Because I knew something was wrong. And I started looking in the places Morton, Malcolm, would have looked, and I found edges of it, not the whole picture. He crouched down, coming to Victor's level, and looked at him from close range. Malcolm found the whole picture. That chip is the whole picture. And I am going to give it to the federal investigators. My attorney has been in contact with for 8 weeks, along with everything we built independently, and then I am going to let it do what evidence does. Victor's face went through something. That ends everything, he said. Not just me, the whole... I know, you built this. You spent 20 years, I know what I built. Kieran stood back up. I know exactly what I built and what it cost and who it cost. He looked at Victor for another moment. You killed Malcolm. There is no version of tonight where you walk away from that to anywhere comfortable. Victor looked at him. For a long moment, 11 years of something not friendship, not exactly, but the specific bond of two people who have operated in close proximity through dangerous things and come to rely on each other in ways that aren't admitted out loud, sat in the space between them. And then Kieran looked away first, which wasn't weakness. It was the decision to stop spending anything more on something that was already over. He walked away from Victor and pulled out his phone. Zuriya stood near the garage door and watched him make the call short, precise, a number that was clearly answered immediately. A few sentences. When he put the phone away, he came back to where she was standing. 30 minutes, he said. My attorney is sending people who can hold them until the federal contact gets here. He looked at her face. Are you all right? Contractions started again, she said. His expression changed instantly. How long? On and off since the stairs. They're spacing out, not getting closer. I don't think it's active labor. She said this as steadily as she could, which was steadier than she felt. But I need Dr. Ahn. He was already on the radio. Dr. Ahn arrived in the garage 4 minutes later with her bag and her gray-streaked hair and the expression of a woman who had been told to stay in a safe room and had remained there until the moment she wasn't needed to and was now not commenting on the evening's events with any more energy than was absolutely necessary. She took Zuriya's vitals in the back seat of one of the vehicles with the door open and the overhead light on. Braxton Hicks, aggravated by stress and physical exertion, she said. Baby's heartbeat is strong. Your pressure is coming down from where it was. She looked up. You need to lie down. Not sit, lie down. I know. Do you need me to be more specific about what happens if we push a 30-week baby into an emergency delivery in a garage at 2 in the morning? No, Zuriya said, I understand. Good. Dr. Ahn closed her bag. Where's a room that isn't actively part of a crime scene? The study was untouched. Kieran had 2 of his people sweep it, and then Dr. Ahn walked Zuriya up there, and she lay down on the long couch that ran beneath the bookshelves and felt, for the first time in felt like months, but was actually 4 hours, a surface under her that was not concrete or marble or staircase. The contractions spaced further apart, then further. Then they stopped. She lay with her hand on her belly and felt the baby move a slow, definitive push of what was probably a foot, pressing outward and then retracting, and she pressed back gently with 2 fingers. I know, she said, quietly to him, to the room, I know. We're done. We're not moving any more tonight. The foot pressed once more and then was still. Kieran came to the study doorway at 2:30. He'd cleaned the cut on his face. Someone had put a narrow strip of medical tape across it and changed his shirt. And he looked like a man who was functioning at about 60% of normal capacity and was doing a credible job of pretending it was closer to 80. He looked at Zuriya on the couch. Federal contacts are here, he said. Victor and the 4 from the garage. The attorney is handling the handoff. He paused. Bianca is being taken into custody. Zuriya absorbed this. She'll cooperate. She already has. She asked for a deal before they finished reading her in. 3 pages of voluntary disclosure before anyone asked her a question. He leaned against the doorframe. She told them about Victor's buyers, the overseas accounts, the network outside the organization. A pause. Some of the charges will stick. Some won't. She helped tonight, that'll be factored. It should be, Zuriya said. He looked at her steadily. She also assaulted you. In this house. While you were pregnant. I know, that doesn't get negotiated away, because she fired at a ceiling later. I know that too. She looked at the ceiling of the study, the old plasterwork, the small imperfections in it. She's going to have to answer for it. I'm not going to ask anyone to make it easier for her. But I'm also not going to spend what I have left tonight on hatred. She paused. I don't have enough left to waste it. He was quiet for a moment. Malcolm's letter, he said. There's something I need to show you. Not tonight, tomorrow, when you've rested, but soon. Tell me now. Zuriya Kieran. She looked at him from the couch. I have spent 3 months in this house, not knowing the full truth of what I was in the middle of. I am done with not knowing. Whatever it is, tell me now while I can still absorb it. He came into the room and sat in the chair across from the couch. He didn't reach for anything, no paper, no phone. He sat with his forearms on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, the dried cut on his face, the tattoos on his fingers, and he looked at the floor for a moment, and then at her. Malcolm wrote me a letter about a year before he died, he said. Not a premonition, he wasn't the type. He wrote it because he was working on something dangerous, and he was organized, and he wanted to be certain things were documented in case the worst happened. He paused. I've had it in the safe since he died. I couldn't. Another pause, shorter. I hadn't been able to open the safe since I found out he was gone. What does it say? It says he loved you. He says that clearly and first, before anything else. Kieran's voice was precise and flat, the way it goes when precision is the only thing standing between a person and the thing underneath. He says he knows you're strong enough to handle whatever comes, but he doesn't want you to have to handle it alone. He says he's putting pieces in place, the pendant, the arrangement with me, because he wants you to have options. Not obligations. Options. He looked up at her. He specifically says, don't let protection become captivity. Don't let guilt become debt. She's not mine to leave behind, she belongs to herself. Those are his words. Zuriya's eyes were dry. She was past the point where crying was available, past the particular threshold where grief finds its physical release, and what she felt instead was a stillness that was nothing like peace and nothing like emptiness, but was its own specific thing, the feeling of a person who has been carrying something for a very long time and has just set it down long enough to feel the weight of it properly for the first time. He knew he might die, she said. Yes, he knew Victor was in the organization. He suspected. He didn't know who specifically, that's why he was building the case instead of coming directly to me. He didn't know if I was connected. Kieran held her gaze. I wasn't. I want you to know that with certainty. I've given the federal contact full access to everything, my own finances, my own communications, everything. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I don't need to see the files, she said. He looked at her. Malcolm trusted you, she said, with the most important thing he had. She looked at her own hands. That's not a blind endorsement of everything you've ever done. I know what you are. I know what this organization is. But he trusted you with this specifically, and he was not a careless man. She looked back at Kieran. That's enough for me to work with. Silence. Outside the study windows, the rain had fully stopped. The sky was still dark, but the particular quality of the dark had changed thinner at the edges, the first imperceptible shift toward morning that you only notice if you've been awake long enough to see it. The organization, she said, what happens to it? Kieran leaned back in the chair. He looked at the ceiling briefly, then back down. The parts that can be made legitimate properties, investments, the construction holdings I've been restructuring for 2 years. Quietly. That accelerates now. He said this without fanfare, without making it sound like a virtue. Like a logistical fact. The rest gets closed. Some of it's already contracted with the federal agreement my attorney arranged. The syndicate, as it's operated for the last 15 years, that's done. What does that cost you? Everything I built. He said it simply. And about half of what I intended to keep. A pause. Turns out the two aren't as different as I thought they were. Zuriya looked at him for a long time. He didn't look away. Malcolm's assets, she said. His legitimate work, he had accounts, contracts that were his own. Separate from the syndicate work. Yes, those are recoverable. I have the records. The attorneys can move to release them from the estate freeze within a few weeks. He looked at her steadily. They belong to you. To him. To his son. She hadn't told anyone it was a son. She hadn't told anyone at all. It was something she'd known from the ultrasound at 22 weeks and had kept private, a small piece of the future she wasn't ready to share with anyone. She looked at Kieran. Malcolm told me, he said quietly. 8 months ago. He was very happy about it. Something moved across his face, private and brief, and then contained. He wanted to name him Isaiah after his grandfather. He said he thought you'd want to choose the full name. She looked at the ceiling. Malcolm Isaiah Cole, she thought. She had been circling toward it for weeks without landing. And there it was, given to her from the other side of everything. The contractions were fully quiet now. The baby was still. Dawn was beginning its patient approach at the edges of the sky outside the study windows, and Zuriya lay on the couch in the study of a man she hadn't trusted 4 months ago, and trusted now, not completely but sufficiently, which was the most honest relationship she'd ever had with trust. And she felt the last hours settling over her like sediment, settling to the bottom of water that has been disturbed, not clean, not resolved, but finding its level. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep, not quite, but she went somewhere adjacent to it, that half state where the body finally releases its held tension without the mind fully disengaging, where you are still aware of the room and the sounds in it, but are no longer standing guard against them. Kieran did not leave. She heard him at some point get up, and she heard the sound of the safe opening, a particular mechanical sound she recognized from months of living in that house. And then he sat back down. She didn't open her eyes. A while later, she heard him exhale in the specific way of a person reading something that costs them, a slow and careful breath out, and she understood, without looking, that he had finally opened the safe. She left him to it. The room was quiet, and outside the window the sky began to lighten, in gradients, and in the house, around them, people moved with the careful efficiency of an aftermath, voices low, feet careful, the particular professionalism of people cleaning up after something large while trying not to intrude on whatever was happening in the study. She thought about Malcolm. She thought about him without protection this time, clearly and directly, the full picture. A man who had loved her and hidden things from her and made her the unknowing center of a dangerous calculation, and had done all of it out of a love that was real and an instinct for protection that had ultimately been, in its mechanics, a failure of honesty. She held both things, the love and the failure. She let them exist together without resolving into a single verdict. She thought about the housing foundation she'd been planning in her head for months, with no money and no concrete path towards it, just an idea, a shape of something, born from knowing exactly what it felt like to have nowhere safe to go. Widowed mothers, struggling families, the people who fell through every available net and found nothing beneath them. She thought about what Malcolm's legitimate assets, properly released, could build. Small, careful, permanent. She thought about the boy who would be born in about 10 weeks and who would grow up knowing his father only as a story, which was a grief she could not fix and would not try to. She would just make sure the story was honest, complete, not sanitize the full person, failures and love, and everything in between. She thought about Kieran and what it meant to call someone family who you had not chosen and had not expected, and who had shown up in the specific way of people who show up when it is genuinely difficult, which is the only showing up that means anything. At some point she did sleep. When she woke, the room was full of early morning light, gray gold, the particular light of a Chicago morning after rain, when the lake reflects everything back and the city looks momentarily clean. Dr. On was in the chair Kieran had been in, awake, watching her with the alert patience of a woman on a night watch that had extended into morning. Kieran was not in the room. "How long?" Zuriya said. 2 hours, approximately. "Your vitals are stable. Contractions have not resumed." Dr. Austin stood, picked up her bag. "You're going to the hospital this morning." "Not a request." "I know. I've arranged transport and a room. Maternal monitoring, observation until I'm satisfied." "You're not negotiating me down from that." "I wasn't going to try," Zuriya said. She sat up slowly. The room received her, the morning light, the bookshelves, the chair, the safe in the corner that was closed again, and would stay closed now, its contents finally released into the world where they could do what Malcolm had built them to do. The envelope was on the side table beside the couch. She saw it before she stood, a plain white envelope, with her name on it, in handwriting she recognized instantly, the handwriting that had written grocery lists and birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter for 7 years, and she sat on the edge of the couch and picked it up and held it for a moment. Dr. On moved to the door, gave her the room. Zuriya turned the envelope over. Sealed. Malcolm had sealed it, and Kieran had not opened it because it wasn't his to open, and she understood now what he'd meant in the letter about options and obligations. This letter, this room, this morning, was not a debt being paid. It was a door being placed in front of her, unlocked, and the choice of whether to walk through it was entirely hers. She opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, dated 14 months ago. She read it. She read it twice. She sat with it on her knees for a long time after, looking out the window at the lake, where the morning light was turning from gray gold to something clearer, and the city was beginning its unremarkable daily business of being a city boats on the water, traffic building on the distant shore road, birds doing what birds do when the rain stops. When Kieran came to the study doorway at 7:15 with 2 cups of kasafas, she was standing at the window. He stopped in the doorway when he saw the letter on the couch behind her. I left it there for you, he said. I should have done it months ago. You weren't ready, she said. Neither was I. He came in and set one of the cups on the windowsill beside her and stood a few feet back with his own cup, and they both looked at the lake for a moment. He calls you his brother, she said, in the letter. Not like a brother, his brother. I know. That makes you my family, she said. Whether either of us decided that or not, Kieran said nothing. But something in him settled the particular stillness of a person who has been waiting for something to be said out loud and didn't know they were waiting until it was. Malcolm's son is going to need people, she said. Not a father, I can't give him that. Not a replacement. But people. People who knew Malcolm, who can tell him who his father actually was, not the version that fits cleanly on a gravestone. She picked up the coffee cup, held it in both hands. I'd like you to be one of those people, if you want that. Kieran looked at the lake. I want that, he said. Good. She took a sip of the coffee. It was very good coffee. Everything in that house was very good, and she had never once taken it for granted, and she would miss it when she was gone. I'll be moving out when I'm out of observation. The doctor wants me in a low-stress environment before the birth. She looked at him sideways. Your house is no longer a low-stress environment. No, he said, it's not. I'll find a place. Malcolm's accounts. We'll cover it, I know. She held his gaze. I'm not leaving because I can't manage. I'm leaving because I need to build something that's mine. That makes sense to you, I think. He looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. It did make sense to him. She could see that it made sense to him in the specific way that something makes sense to us to a person when it reflects something they have also had to learn. Not easily and not early, but eventually, the hard way. Outside the lake was bright now, fully morning, the gold of it hitting the water in long horizontal bands. In 10 weeks, she would bring a boy into a world that had been violent and complicated, and had also contained, inside all of that, people who had showed up when it was difficult. Kieran, with his promises kept, Mrs. Hannah with her covered plates and her unspoken solidarity, Tomas with his careful body between her and doors, Castillo with his radio and his unasked questions, even Bianca, in the final accounting, with 3 shots into a plaster ceiling and a door open that let the right people through. None of it was simple. None of it was clean. You didn't come through a night like that and find yourself on the other side with everything resolved into something comfortable. You came through it carrying everything you'd learned, all the bruises and the clarity and the grief and the strange accidental warmth of people who became your people without auditions or agreements. And you moved forward with it because moving forward was the only direction that had anything in it. She finished the coffee. She set the cup down on the windowsill. She picked up the letter from the couch and folded it carefully along its original creases and put it in her pocket, next to the chip, next to everything that Malcolm had built for his son, and placed in her hands to carry. I need to go pack a bag, she said. Dr. An is serious about the hospital. She's always serious, Kieran said. So am I, Zuriya said. She walked to the study door and through it and into the hallway, and behind her the morning light came through the study windows and lay across the floor in long bright strips. And the house was quiet, in the particular way of houses that have survived something and are still standing, not unmarked but standing. And Zuriya Cole walked down the hallway of a house she had arrived at with nothing, and was leaving with everything that mattered. And she did not look back, not because the past was behind her and finished, but because the future was in front of her and was hers, and she had never, not once, belonged to anything as fully as she belonged to that.